Kelly Detweiler, principal with Northbridge Energy Partners and a contributor to Forbes.com. And I'm here with Rob Berglund from the Weather Company.
Morning.
And we're at day 3 of the ETS17 Energy Thought Summit here in Austin. What are your impressions so far, Rob?
Well, I guess my first impression is that people really like this event because it is really well attended. I would say that what I've seen is that the biggest talks, people are willing to stand out in the hallway, you know, if that's what it takes to be able to listen. So extremely popular, well-engaged audience that are showing up and doing what it takes to sit in. So, yeah.
I'm always impressed by the generosity of spirit and the willingness of people to share as well.
Yeah.
Which is good because we're going to ask you right now to be generous and share some information with us.
I'll do what I can.
Okay, so we've been talking about designing for the energy future, and a lot of the conversations in many of the panels has been about just that, bringing different parts of the toolkit into that design process.
That's right.
You're all about weather and data and providing skill sets to customers, and you're a subsidiary of IBM, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so IBM's been big data for a long,
That's
long
right.
time. So what does that look like in terms of the customers that you serve and some of the solutions that you're providing to them these days?
Okay, great. Well, I mean, part of the big trend in this conference definitely is, you know, as it is in many industries, is the overarching increasing volume of data. And then what can you do with that data? I mean, it becomes, you know, a challenge to, you know, get a hold of it, to transform it, and then to make some actionable insight out of it. And so, you know, the Weather Company was purchased about a year ago, acquired by IBM, as they transformed this continued transformation from, you know, selling mainframes and hardware to analytics, things like cognitive computing, and the household name that's, you know, that's being labeled under these days is Watson. And so we as well, just ironically at the same time, we're transforming. And so, you know, what we do now, we acquired in 2012 Weather Underground. And at that time, there was less than 100,000 weather stations, but that still made up the most number of weather stations in the entire planet. So as we continue this theme of sensing devices, IoT inputs, we've really transformed the way that we do business into ingesting and taking in more data from places that you never would have thought of before to do a better job really with extremely localized kind of weather insight. And that data can come from what's now 250,000 weather stations, that's global, to mobile devices. You know, Samsung and Apple, we have partnerships, deep partnerships with them, and we're the native weather source. And in fact, if you allowed and you said yes, we would know the location of the user. We'd even pull things like pressure off their phone. So if you can imagine millions, hundreds of millions of people having this data, you know, as part of a massive amount of ingest coming in, we're now really doing a lot more with focusing on extremely precise locations, very accurate, and you can use that in all kinds of business contexts, not just energy and utility.
So can you give us an example of how someone turns that raw information into actionable intelligence that ultimately either reduces costs, increases revenue, or somehow otherwise drives profitability?
You bet. One of our big applications in the energy world for sure is, you know, around this theme of predictability and reliability. You know, we think of the way that we're forecasting renewables at a tighter precision than we used to, but maybe a newer one that's worth talking about is just the ability to predict outages. You know, which so often causes such, you know, catastrophic losses of revenue. It can cause people problems, customer engagement problems clearly as well. Some of these top 3. And in our case, we're doing a new outage prediction model that uses that hyperlocal weather data information. And in perfect context within IBM, what they do well, analytics, machine learning, it's taking in historical outage data from a utility, for example, historical weather data at high resolution, combining those in a machine learning context, and then of course predicting for a utility within the context of their mobilization. They typically have, you know, 3 to 6 levels of mobilization. And if you can then better predict when to roll a crew, how big that effort should be, in other words, the level of mobilization, a couple things will happen. You'll do way better with getting the lights turned back on when you need to for a customer, which should help with, you know, your retention and engagement.
Because you know exactly where to go and what resources to bring to bear.
And that second part in particular is the economic impact. I mean, how much is a utility spending when they shouldn't? Okay? And how much, you know, are they losing when they should have rolled and they did not? So it really has to do with better predicting the mobilization effort wrapped around severe weather outages.
So basically you take historical outage data, pair that with weather data, and now when you're predicting in the future, oh, we think we're going to have this kind of event, you can predict what kind of impacts that's likely to have on the utility and where, so you know where to bring those resources.
That's right. And
Okay,
all those IoT sensings really help to do
Yeah.
a micro, a better micro job with that. So the weather stations that we've got now, 250,000 being a big part of that, but the mobile data we've talked about, even aviation data, if you can believe that, big source of these localization that's better painting the picture, so you can do at the end a better job of saying this level of mobilization is needed for this kind of impending weather event.
Okay, how about like with wind farms? So if wind is a function of a cube of the wind speed, then a very small variation in wind speed can really change. If you go from 10 miles to 20, it's 8 times as much energy being produced.
That's right.
So does your data help to predict the output of a wind farm, for example, that sort of thing?
That's right. So both solar and wind generation is a big part of what we're doing. And this new way, this new approach of using IoT, hyperlocal ingest of data, transforming it so that we can better forecast at pinpoint precision, is helping with solar plants, is helping with wind farms. So as an example, it wasn't too long ago, maybe 5 years ago, we were really only able to forecast, and this is just a limit of the technology at the time, about 1 million locations worldwide. That's about how sparse the kind of gridded approach was. And we would only be able to update those, say, 5, 6, 7 times a day. And that was a lot of data back then.
Yeah.
So we've revolutionized on a new cloud-based platform, and we're able to do 2.2 billion locations now every 15 minutes. So you can imagine the scale of 1 million, 5 times a day, 2.2 billion every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So you can do a lot more with better predicting wind generation, better predicting solar generation, which we do.
And that makes the whole grid more efficient.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so then you can also, I would presume, I remember one at the utility company I worked with before, we had 4 meteorologists because we had 15,000 megawatts of load we were trading. And I said, why do you need all these people? And they said, soil moisture content in the Midwest affects what's going on in PJM, a day later sort of thing. So, so do you work with forecasters and grid planners with that kind of precision in terms of what's happening in major cities and so on based upon projected temperature and then actual responses?
Absolutely. You bring up a great example about demand generation. And weather has always been on the demand side. It's moving more into the supply side with forecasting, as you said, wind farms and solar. But the demand, the net load, has always been about weather.
Weather drives load.
Absolutely. And so we've been very connected to meteorologists, over time. But as we've moved into IBM, more and more we're getting involved with analytics. So the IT departments are coming to bear. Data science people are coming to bear that we used to not really interact with. And so our world is really kind of merging from just doing weather to doing weather and analytics. So for example, you correctly cited that temperature has a whole, it's really almost the whole thing about how much demand is going to be needed on the grid at any one time. But as you start to get into the analytics and you find out the movement of people, combined with temperature and other variables, things like dew points, which have so much to do with how much electricity is being used, we're moving the ball forward. And so we think of things as kind of doing it the old way and things as doing it the new way. And analytics combined with weather is the new way.
Who comes up with the question, right? So you got all the raw data, and then there's this value proposition that somebody decides to investigate, right? That says, oh, if I combine X and Y and Z together and create this algorithm, I can know a certain thing. Is there a group of people in your team, or is it customers that say, I want to know this? Like, where does that equation come from?
Absolutely. The best way to do that is a combination of both. And I would say that we're doing that better than we have been in the past because we are bolstered more than ever by data science. So we've invested in the past just couple of years, just the weather company side of the house, in some pretty deep data science. But IBM has already been there, and they've been operating there now for years and realized that this really is the future for them. The ability to do data science, analytics, cognitive computing. Again, that's this Watson idea. That's right, exactly.
More like a human mind.
In learning, Could you imagine the future is going to be that we all have our mobile apps, we all have our weather app, but we'll take a picture of the sky. Watson will be right there to interpret that and say, well, okay, it's that kind of cloud because it's seen 100,000 images, and now it's going to tell us more hyper-locally what's really going to happen with rain. Is it going to rain on you? And so where the questions are coming from would be a good combination of both. We're going out to meet business needs, You know, that's really, you know, what we do. And yet we've been in the weather business for so long, we have hunches, and we tend to vet those out with the customer. You know, can this help you if we could do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's been the biggest, have there been any aha, like surprises where, oh, we had all this information, we didn't know it was going to be useful in this fashion? Has there been any sort of really surprise where you realize, oh wow, we got this data and we didn't know it was going to be useful this way, and then someone comes along and says, oh yeah, we need this for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest surprises is, and maybe this is no surprise to people that are listening and to yourself, but the historical data is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you can have a good set of clean, reliable historical data, you can build a model. You can build predictions and correlations like the one we talked about with outages. And having 250,000 weather stations all recording and storing what has happened hyper-locally is a big thing when you're trying to do really good predictions. So that's been a big aha as we've moved further and further into analytics, into cognitive computing and the combination of weather with both of those to find that, okay, if we're going to really do analytics, good history of weather data, and hopefully hyper-locally is a differentiator.
Would be critical.
Yeah.
So ideology and politics aside, one does hear that we're moving into a period of more extreme weather based on the data that's out there, which would suggest to me that the value of your services become increasingly more critical in terms of knowing what to do when those things happen, because you've got the data to know where to marshal the resources. Are customers saying to you, yeah, we're seeing more volatility in terms of weather, and we recognize our vulnerabilities here, and we really need this stuff with a sense of urgency that's new, or is it just an evolving conversation?
I would say that there's definitely an immediate, we'll call it an immediate awareness that times are different.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take me, say 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, where I had to convince a customer that, hey, weather is getting to be more severe.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all walking into the room and sitting at the table and nodding our heads.
Yeah.
The weather is severe.
Yeah.
And it's getting more severe.
Yeah.
Whether you talk about just the escalation of peak temperatures, think about ERCOT, for example, continuing to see record-breaking temperatures and the demand for load constantly breaking, new records, right? So we're all kind of nodding our heads that, severe weather is definitely happening. And, what does that mean to the customer and ultimately to their end user customer? Because as more and more customers have the option to choose who their, where their power is going to come from, where their heat's going to come from, we want to do a better job with helping the utility stay engaged. In a really good way, a very common sense way to stay engaged is that they help their end user customer, you and me in our house, making decisions about air conditioning, decisions about heating, with engagement, and knowing the weather. And so we built a program just for that, to help utilities, stay engaged with a weather facet to their end user customer.
So last question, what's this going to look like 5 or 10 years out, based upon already the sophistication we have today? Where does this move to?
Okay. Well, to me, that's the pure excitement part. I mean, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning and why I've been, sticking with weather for 14 years. But more than ever, I can see that when you combine Watson and the ability to do cognitive computing, some people call it artificial intelligence, some call it augmented intelligence, which really is just the ability to take you and me as people
and leverage,
better with a computer or machines, so that we can make better decisions. But the sky is the limit when you combine weather with that kind of artificial intelligence with Watson. We talked about taking pictures and having Watson interpret it. For sure. Watson could interpret Twitter, for example, and take every Twitter feed and everything that has to do with weather is even mentioned, ingest it, transform it, interpret it, and help us to give real-time insight to something that's happening hyper-locally. That's powerful.
That's profoundly powerful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
You're
your
welcome.
time and your
Thank
insights
you.
and your generosity, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
I sure appreciate it, Peter.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. All right.